Evening dreamers. You pull the blanket over your shoulders, a soft hush settling over the room. The hum of the outside world fades, replaced by the quiet pulse of your own breath. Somewhere far off, a window creaks. It might be wind, it might be memory. The light on the wall flickers like a candle behind old glass, and your pillow has that worn-in softness that makes your thoughts move slower, like molasses down a cold spoon. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Outside, the sky bruises with dusk, and the air smells like damp wood and barley flour. Somewhere, something ancient is turning in the wind. You feel it before you hear it. A groaning axle, a low moan of strained timber. Welcome to your new bed for the night, a medieval windmill. It's tall, skeletal, and absolutely not built for comfort. You're about to climb inside. The ladder isn't so much a ladder as it is a dare. You step onto the bottom rung and immediately question every decision you've ever made. It's slick with years of oily flour dust and maybe a touch of bat guano. The boards creak in protest, like they haven't seen a human over 90 pounds since the reign of Richard the Lionheart. As you rise, the walls tighten, narrowing into that iconic cone shape. Every breath smells like old sacks, grain husks, mouse droppings, and mildew. There's a moment, around the halfway point, where you become very aware that if you slip, no one will hear you scream over the creaking millstones. You pass a hook with what looks like a molting bundle of feathers. Congratulations, that's your pillow. The bed is a crude wooden plank covered in slightly moldy straw, and if you're lucky, someone's old tunic for warmth. Millers didn't waste fabric on sheets. You lie down and try not to think about the last dozen bodies that slept in exactly the same space, coughing into the night and scratching their itchy scalps raw. Your bedroom is a grain loft wedged into the upper interior of the windmill tower. You're nestled just under the cap, where the sails connect, and that means you're one gust of wind away from feeling the entire building tremble. You're not technically supposed to sleep up here, but when you're the night watch, or the apprentice on the lowest rung of the mill's pecking order, this is what you get. The good news? It's warm thanks to the body heat trapped in the tight wooden belly of the building. The bad news? That heat also makes the smell of sweaty socks, musty grain sacks, and smoldering oil lanterns really blossom. Every now and then, the mill groans like it's about to split in two. The gear system in the head cap above your head is groaning under strain, and you're lying directly beneath it like some unlucky guest beneath a piano on a rope. You don't sleep under the machinery. You are the crash mat, and don't get too cozy, because this mill doesn't stop at night. Unlike water mills that depended on daylight and river levels, windmills could, and often did, run after dark, especially when weather allowed. This one's turning, slowly, gratingly. Every few seconds, the massive sails outside catch a breeze and set the vertical shaft clunking into motion. Wooden cogs engage, and the entire upper tower lets out a groan like a dying whale in a corset. You try to focus on something comforting. There's a small window with a square of foggy moonlight. It flickers each time a sail passes, like a blinking eye. Down below, the turning stones produce a dull roar, like muffled thunder echoing through a wooden stomach. It's a bedtime soundtrack of clattering chains, creaking beams, and distant rat fights. For medieval folks, the windmill wasn't just a workplace. It was the heart of the economy, the pulse of the village. Grain came in, bread came out, and someone, probably you, was always responsible for guarding it. Theft was a serious concern, so sleeping in the mill wasn't optional. You were the alarm system. This role wasn't all bad. Millers often had a little more coin than their neighbors. They were sometimes exempt from manual labor in the fields, and had enough flour to trade for cheese, ale, or a decent pair of boots. But they were also deeply unpopular. The church often accused them of greed. Villagers whispered that millers short-measured flour or added chalk to increase the weight. Whether or not those claims were true, well, historians still argue whether millers were shrewd entrepreneurs or petty swindlers with a gift for looking innocent. As your eyes adjust, you spot something odd. A string of little bones, maybe a charm, tied above the door. Not surprising. Superstition ran deep among mill workers. Between the constant danger and the isolation, many swore mills were haunted. It was common for charms, symbols, even prayers to be etched into beams. One old mill in Kent had over a dozen carved witch marks near the flour chute. If ghosts weren't real, the people working here were doing an awful lot of preparation just in case. In the corner, a sack shivers slightly. You tell yourself it's just settling grain, or maybe a mouse. Definitely not something bigger. Definitely not the legendary monk who supposedly died here in a freak grindstone accident, and now drags his broken chain across the attic floor at night. That's just a story, probably, so you pull your cloak tighter and try to sleep. The floor under your straw bed shifts subtly each time the wind catches a sail. Above you, massive wooden teeth grind and clunk in their endless midnight rhythm. You're trying not to think about lice or curses or rats. You close your eyes, you drift a little, and just as you're almost under, something in the beams gives an especially loud groan, like a voice maybe, like breath. Sleep tight. The grind never stops, literally. You learn this somewhere between your third and fourth attempt to fall asleep, when the windmill's giant gear teeth slam together with a rhythmic, bone-deep thunk, thunk, thunk that syncs up, unfortunately, with your heartbeat. You'd like to think you could get used to it. Spoiler, you don't. Medieval windmills didn't pause for rest just because the sun dipped below the horizon. If the wind was blowing, and it often was, it was wasted profit not to grind the grain. Some mills even had contracts or dues to pay that demanded a certain amount of flour each day. That meant pulling double shifts, often with little regard for what time of day or night it was. And this wasn't soft background noise, like a rain app on your phone. It was relentless, intimate, and loud. The massive sails outside continue turning, groaning as they swing around. They catch the wind, transfer the force through the main shaft running vertically down the center of the building, and engage a horizontal gear called the crown wheel. That, in turn, drives the millstones. You're essentially trying to sleep inside a gigantic, groaning, mechanical digestive system. Every time the main gear clunks into place, it shudders the entire wooden structure. Your bed jumps slightly with each rotation. Loose flour dust rains down from overhead, creating a fine, invisible snowfall that's probably coating your face and definitely coating your lungs. You cough quietly and then wonder if you should feel bad about waking the rats. Speaking of which, there's movement somewhere below. Could be sacks settling, could be an apprentice kicking in his sleep, could also be a local villager trying to sneak a peek at the grain store. Theft was an ever-present concern. That's half the reason millers, or at least one unlucky soul, had to stay inside overnight in the first place. You weren't just the grinder, you were the night watch, the human lock system, and the early warning system for grain rustlers, fire, and whatever else the darkness might deliver. You roll over. Bad idea. The straw pokes straight through your thin cloak and something crinkles. Maybe an old crust of bread, maybe something with legs. You decide not to check. Your ears ring. It's not just the sound of the gears, it's the way they sound. The clashing of wood and iron, the constant pressure of moving grain. It becomes a sort of hypnosis. You know how some people say they can hear their name being called in white noise? You're starting to hear conversations in the gear teeth, voices, accusations, a very polite suggestion that the mill is cursed. It doesn't help that there's a lingering medieval belief that windmills could be possessed. In parts of Europe, it was believed that spirits of the dead, especially those denied burial, might nest in the crevices of turning mechanisms. The noise, villagers said, was their whispers, the grind, their punishment. It's not hard to see how that idea took root. Try sleeping 3 feet below a grinding wheel without getting a little spiritual. And yes, the constant mechanical labor affected Miller's health. The rhythmic vibration of the gears, the dust, the heat, all of it could damage hearing, irritate lungs, and create something the Victorians would later call mill madness, a kind of agitation brought on by lack of silence and chronic exposure to the same low frequencies. Some scholars suspect this was an early understanding of what we'd now call auditory stress or sensory overload. Historians still argue whether this was real physical trauma or just villagers looking for new ways to accuse Millers of being weird. You get up for a moment and pace your tiny corner of the loft. Below, the stones are grinding wheat, oat, maybe even rye. Each grain type gives off a slightly different scent when pulverized. Rye is sharper, more bitter. Wheat is mellow. You imagine a blind monk being able to tell the flour type just by scent. Then you remember you read that in a tavern, and the speaker was already 4 ales deep. Another clunk. A new load of grain has been shoveled into the hopper. It funnels downward into the spinning stones, which crush it grain by grain. That friction creates heat. Some mills even risk catching fire from overheated stones and wood rubbing together. But tonight it's just warm, not cozy warm, unsettling warm, like the warmth of something that might eventually burst into flames. You start thinking about time. There's no clock. No sense of late or early, just grinding and the occasional bark of a dog in the village down the hill. You wonder how long it's been since you lay down. An hour? 3? It could be midnight, or maybe it's nearly dawn. The only light comes from the narrow window slit near your bed and the occasional flash of lightning from a faraway storm. You count. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, no thunder. It's not close, yet. Millers had to be adaptable. Their sleep schedules weren't determined by comfort, but by production. If the wind stopped at night, you got rest. If it howled, you were up and grinding. And if a storm was coming, you had to decide quickly. Stop the sails to prevent damage, or risk running them faster to finish a grind, and lock things down before lightning struck. Not that you have much choice tonight. The sails keep spinning. The gears keep grumbling. Your eyelids droop, but your nerves keep twitching. Somewhere below, a pulley lets out a sudden snap. Probably nothing. Probably just a counterweight shifting. Probably. The air's changed a bit. A colder breeze is drifting in, tinged with rain. You close your eyes and pretend it's fresh linen. It isn't, but the lie is nice. And then, just as you're on the edge of sleep again, you hear it. A soft, dragging sound from the staircase. Not wood against wood. More like fabric brushing stone. You sit up, heart thudding in sync with the millstones. You wait. Nothing. Just the grind, just the wind, just your imagination, right? Still, you pull the straw a little closer and keep your feet off the floor, just in case. Feathers, straw, and probably lice. That's what you're sleeping in tonight, or on, to be exact. And it's not really sleeping so much as shivering with intent. Your bedding is a rough pallet, made of a few crooked planks with a shallow pile of hay dumped on top. Technically, it's more comfortable than the bare floor. Realistically, so is a mossy rock. You shuffle around in your cloak, trying to find the least pokey configuration of straw. The hay crackles under you like dry leaves, and a few errant stalks poke directly into your side. Some millers did stuff their mattresses, or ticks, with feathers, but you're not one of those fancy flower lords. You're the mill apprentice, which means you're lucky your bed isn't just the corner of the grain bin. And then there are the bugs. Tiny black specks scatter when you shift the hay. You pause. Yep, those are probably lice, or fleas, or just the freeloading spawn of centuries-old straw. You scratch your neck, it doesn't help. The more you think about it, the more it itches. If you were really wealthy, like noble wealthy, you might sleep on a feather bed with linen sheets, lavender sachets, and someone paid to warm your slippers. But in the mill, you're dealing with recycled straw that hasn't seen a dry barn since last harvest and bedding that smells faintly like chicken. Cleanliness standards were negotiable. Millers spent their days sweating next to grinding stones and grain chutes. They'd go weeks without bathing, especially in colder months, when water was both scarce and a guaranteed route to pneumonia. Your bed isn't just shared with insects, it's shared with the ghosts of body odors past. And it's communal. That's the kicker. You're not alone on this hay pile. Across from you, another apprentice is already snoring like a haunted accordion. His boots are off, and you're deeply aware of that fact, because one of them is pointing directly at your face. Medieval sleeping arrangements rarely involve privacy. Families often slept in the same room, and apprentices like you were expected to bunk together, sometimes even under the same blanket to conserve warmth. This wasn't considered odd. It was just practical. Personal space hadn't been invented yet. Occasionally, the miller himself would sleep nearby, though he usually got the slightly less awful mattress. His bed might be tucked into a corner of the main grinding floor, shielded from flour dust by a curtain or a strategically placed flour sack. Either way, you're never far from someone's breath, someone's feet, or someone's midnight teeth grinding. And the smell, it's a bouquet of humanity. Unwashed linen, old grain, dried sweat, and a little whiff of something dead in the wall. Could be a mouse, could be a rat that got flattened in the pulley system. You try not to think about it. Above you, the roof groans again. The wooden beams shift as the cap of the mill adjusts to follow the wind. It's a smart design, really. Some windmills had entire rotating tops that allowed the sails to be turned into the wind. But when you're directly underneath that moving structure, it feels less like innovation and more like an elaborate death trap. You roll over. Your face lands squarely in the straw. You exhale and get a mouthful of hay dust. There's a feather in your ear, and not the good kind. This one is clearly from a goose that died angry. You wonder if people back then had any strategies for making these conditions bearable. Some did. Medieval folk might burn sage or rosemary to mask odors or ward off bad spirits. Others hung herbs near the bedding or tucked sachets into pillows, not for freshness, but to keep bugs away. Some even believed that sleeping with garlic near the head would prevent nightmares. Whether it worked or just made everything smell like a sausage cart is unclear. Historians still argue whether these remedies were practical pest control or just deeply aromatic superstition. You try to remember if you brought anything useful. You check your pouch. One stale crust of bread, a bent spoon, and a carved wooden charm meant to keep you from being crushed by machinery. Thanks, Grandma. Not much help in the pillow department. Someone turns over nearby and lets out a low groan, half sleep, half indigestion. You open your eyes and stare at the ceiling. A cobweb shimmers in the moonlight. It's the most peaceful thing in the room. You watch it sway gently with the movement of the windmill. Then a spider scurries across it, peace shattered. Despite the discomfort, the medieval mill apprentice often didn't question these conditions. This was simply how life worked. You were born into labor, slept where you could, and got used to being sore and itchy. Not much time was spent daydreaming about thread counts or ergonomic mattresses. Your current setup could generously be described as biodegradable, but you're tired, bone tired. The kind of tired that makes even this itchy, creaky hay pile seem vaguely acceptable. You shift one last time, tucking your cloak around your shoulders and placing your bent spoon under your straw, like a weird bedtime ritual. And then, a quiet moment. The gears grind, the wind hums. Your snoring roommate wheezes out a rhythm like an old harmonica. You're not comfortable, you're not clean, but you're warm, and for a few minutes, that's enough. Until, of course, something rustles inside the hay next to your hip. You freeze, you wait, nothing. You slowly inch your hand toward the source, heart beating a little faster. Skitter. Yep, definitely something alive in the bedding. Could be a mouse. Could be one of those giant mill cockroaches everyone pretends aren't real. Either way, you're not alone under the straw. So you shift again, whispering an apology to the vermin. and resign yourself to the fact that in a medieval windmill, rest is a relative term. You nestle into your itchy, flea-ridden bed and try not to breathe too deeply. Sleep is a gamble. Dreams are optional. Bugs, however, are guaranteed. That time a ghost monk haunted the grain chute. You remember hearing about it back when you first arrived at the mill. You didn't believe it then, but now, somewhere between the thudding gears, the flutter of moths against the lantern glass, and the impossible chill in your spine, you're starting to reconsider your skepticism. Because tonight everything feels a little off. The wind moans through the slats with too much personality. The pulley creaks like it's trying to speak. And that shape in the grain chute? Probably just a sack. Definitely not a robed figure watching you breathe. Superstition ran deep in medieval communities, especially in places like mills. These towering, creaking machines were seen as both miraculous and unnerving. They transformed humble grain into precious flour, fed the village, and never stopped moving. And anything that powerful, that essential, that noisy, well, it had to have something unnatural living in it. Millers themselves were often viewed with suspicion. They worked strange hours, slept alone in the mill, and handled food in quantities most peasants would never dream of. In many folk tales, millers were portrayed as greedy, secretive, or even demonic. They were the subject of whispered warnings and tavern jokes. And if anything strange happened near the windmill, stray animals dying, bread not rising, mysterious howling at night, the blame was close at hand. The ghost monk legend is one of many. Supposedly, long ago, a traveling friar came to bless the mill, after rumors of evil spirits began to swirl. He was a quiet man, devout, and deeply skeptical of ghost stories, until he fell into the grain chute during a storm and was crushed under the falling rye. Since then, some say his spirit lingers, protecting the grain. Others claim he drags trespassers down into the chute to join him in dusty penance. You stare at the chute. It's just wood and rope. Just a practical funnel for moving grain from the storage loft to the grinding stones below. But when the light shifts just right, it casts a shadow that looks disturbingly monk-like. You pull your blanket tighter. Mills were full of these stories. In parts of Germany, legends told of Mühlgeister, mill ghosts, who caused accidents or whispered secrets at night. In England, people etched protection symbols into the beams. In Italy, some believed mills stood on old pagan grounds and were natural crossing points between the worlds. Whether you believed in spirits or not, a nighttime shift in a creaking windmill would absolutely make you start. And maybe it wasn't all superstition. Grain dust can do strange things to the human mind. When you breathe it in constantly, day after day, night after night, it begins to clog your lungs, irritate your throat, and cloud your thinking. Combine that with poor air circulation, low lighting, sleep deprivation, and a few cups of barley ale, and it's not hard to see how hallucinations became folklore. Historians still argue whether these ghost stories were actual community beliefs or simply cautionary tales, ways of warning apprentices not to go poking around the machinery. One slip, after all, and you'd vanish into the chute or get caught in the gears. Better to say, "Don't disturb the monk," than to explain the fine mechanics of leverage and rotational force to a sleepy teen. Still, your brain can't help but play along. You start imagining the monk again, tall, silent, cloaked in centuries of dust. Does he patrol the grinding floor? Does he emerge from the chute, eyes hollow, whispering prayers for the dead grain? Maybe he just stands in corners watching, waiting. You blink hard, the shadow's gone. Or maybe it moved. You wish the lantern weren't flickering so much. You roll onto your back and stare at the ceiling. There, in the soot-stained beam, you notice a faint etching, a symbol shaped like a backward Z with a cross through it. It looks like it was scratched there with a knife. Not decorative, protective. You've seen this before. They're called witch marks, part of a broader practice of apotropaic symbols, meant to ward off evil. You might also find them above doors, on hearths, near cribs. Here in the mill, it's clear someone wanted to keep something out, or maybe in. There's a soft thump below. The wind? A shifting sack? You try to convince yourself of that, but it's starting to feel like tonight is one long audition for a medieval ghost story. You reach for your spoon, not because it's useful, just because it's metal and reassuringly solid. And then the air changes. It gets thicker somehow, denser. The grinding of the millstones slows just a bit, not a full stop, just enough for the silence between thuds to stretch and breathe. From below, a whisper, just one. It could be the wind, could be the grain sifting, could be your own pulse playing tricks again, but it doesn't feel like it. You sit up slowly, heart hammering in your chest. No one else is stirring. Your fellow apprentice is still snoring, a puddle of drool collecting in his scratchy beard. You're alone, except for whatever that was. You tell yourself this is normal, that everyone in this job hears things, that this is why stories of haunted mills have been passed down through generations. Because it's dark, because it's loud, because it never sleeps. In truth, mills were terrifying by nature. Enclosed, wooden, creaky, flammable, filled with moving parts, more like a giant wooden trap than a cozy workplace. There were no safety rails, no off switch, no emergency exits. Everything moved, everything clattered, and everything felt like it might go wrong. So, is it really a ghost? Probably not. But in the middle of the night, wrapped in a damp cloak, lying on straw that smells like goat breath, you can forgive your brain for thinking otherwise. Eventually, the rhythm of the grind returns. The sails catch a steadier wind. The shadows settle into their corners. The chute looks like just a chute again, but the grain keeps falling, the gear keeps turning, and the whisper lingers in your ear, just long enough to make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, you should say a little prayer. Not for you, for the monk. You try to pee. The windmill tries to kill you. That's not hyperbole. It's a deeply personal first-hand assessment of your recent attempt to make a midnight bathroom run. What should be a simple process of bladder relief turns into an obstacle course of deadly gears, pitch-black staircases, and bad decisions made under pressure. Let's rewind about 3 minutes. You wake with a jolt, not from a noise, but from a familiar inner urgency. Nature is calling, not yelling, but clearing its throat assertively. You try to ignore it. You shift in your straw pile. You count backwards from 100. You recite the Lord's Prayer in Latin, or at least your best guess. Nothing works. Your body has officially entered now or never territory. So you sit up, already regretting everything. It's cold. Your legs tingle from being bent for hours. You step down from your bed and land barefoot on a splinter. Great. One for the journal. There's no proper chamber pot in this corner. You could try relieving yourself into the grain chute, but you're not suicidal. So you do what any underpaid medieval apprentice would do. Head to the lower level where the real pot should be waiting. It's supposed to be tucked into a corner near the storage bins. Theoretically, the mill's internal staircase is a masterpiece of bad engineering. Narrow, uneven steps spiral down like an Escher drawing made of rotted pine. You grip the railing, which wobbles suspiciously, and descend, trying not to breathe in too much of the mold, flour, bat excrement cocktail that passes for air. The moment you reach the first bend, something massive clunks just overhead. The gears, still moving, still very much awake. You remind yourself not to stand too close to the shaft. You've heard the stories. Apprentices pulled in by loose cloaks, arms snapped like dry twigs, one poor soul whose beard got caught and yanked his face directly into a turning cog. You silently thank yourself for not growing facial hair yet. You make it to the main grinding floor, where the 2 millstones are still turning. Slowly now, but the sound is relentless. Scrape thunk, scrape thunk. The wooden floor trembles beneath your feet, and you can feel the vibration in your ribs. The chamber pot, if it exists, is nowhere to be seen. You panic slightly. You consider improvising into a corner, but the apprentice's code forbids that. And also you don't want to be haunted by ghost monks and ghost janitors. So you press on, creeping around the base of the shaft, trying not to imagine slipping and becoming part of tomorrow's rye mix. There's a storage nook at the far end, behind a curtain made of old flour sacks. You tiptoe across the boards, each step echoing through the hollow belly of the mill. When you lift the sack curtain, there it is, the pot. A battered wooden bucket with an unmistakable smell. You nearly cry with relief. Now, the logistics of peeing in medieval times weren't glamorous. The pot has no seat, no privacy, and no sense of shame. You do your business as quickly as possible, flinching every time the machinery shifts or groans above you. For all you know, the pot is sitting right next to a load-bearing beam or a sack of flour that's about to tip over. Job done. You exhale. Mission accomplished. You're halfway through congratulating yourself when the worst happens. The wind outside picks up. With a low, moaning whoosh, the sails catch a fresh gust, and the entire building shudders. The main shaft jerks into high gear, and suddenly everything is louder, faster, and 400% more terrifying. The ceiling creaks. The floor vibrates like an angry cello string. And somewhere behind you, a pulley chain rattles in a way that's aggressively ominous. You move to leave, and nearly trip over a rope left coiled on the floor. One foot slips, and for a split second, your face is heading toward the wooden wall, like it's the finish line of a very stupid race. You catch yourself on the doorframe and curse under your breath. The pot tips slightly. You decide not to investigate whether it spilled. As you stand there, heart racing, a sack of barley tips slightly on a high shelf. Not enough to fall, just enough to lean menacingly. For some reason, this is what makes you question your entire life. Why is everything in here poised for collapse? Why are all the essential functions, eating, sleeping, peeing, located within 2 feet of industrial death traps? Why is the bathroom bucket under the grain chute? You wonder not for the first time if the entire windmill was designed by someone with a grudge against apprentices. You make your way back up the stairs like a condemned man climbing the gallows. Every step creaks. Every rafter seems closer to cracking. You reach the top loft and slump back into your hay pile, suddenly exhausted, breathing like you've just outrun a bear. Your fellow apprentice has not moved. He's still asleep, mouth open, emitting occasional honks. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the grind of the gears and the echo of your own heartbeat. The mill never stops. Not for the wind, not for the night, not for your bladder. This isn't just a workplace. It's a lumbering, creaking, uncaring machine that eats grain, eats men, and eats sleep. You curl up tightly, mutter a half-hearted prayer that tomorrow doesn't involve any new injuries, and finally, maybe, start to drift. But next time, you're peeing in a jug. You don't care if it's cursed. Welcome to the rat's afterparty. You're not entirely sure when the scratching starts, but once you notice it, you really notice it. It's faint at first, like tiny claws testing the floorboards, sniffing out opportunities, weighing whether you're asleep enough to ignore them. Then comes the squeaking. Not just one rat. This is a group. Possibly extended family. Maybe even a community event. It's a full-on rodent rave in the rafters. You roll over and peek through the slats of your straw-filled sleeping platform, praying it was just your imagination. Nope. You lock eyes with one of them. A fat, gray-furred little burglar sitting bold as brass on a barrel of millet, chewing smugly and making direct eye contact. You blink. He doesn't. He's not scared. He's dared. Medieval mills were basically rat playgrounds. They were warm, full of food, rarely cleaned, and built entirely from chewable materials. The grain bins were rat buffets. The feed sacks were rat hammocks. And the people? Just warm, semi-conscious inconveniences who occasionally screamed and threw shoes. You consider throwing a shoe yourself, but A, you only have one left, and B, that rat looks like it lifts. The average medieval windmill might have hosted dozens of rats at a time. Some even became permanent residents. living out multi-generational rat dynasties within the walls. It's said that some millers, particularly in colder months, simply learn to cohabit. There are stories, likely apocryphal, but still grim, of millers naming their regular rat visitors and tossing them scraps to keep the peace. Better a rat, you know, the old saying goes, than a priest with questions. One thing's certain, rats were no joke. They chewed through everything: sacks, ropes, grain stores, even floorboards. And worse, they were disease carriers. Fleas from rats were among the primary culprits in the spread of the Black Death. So not only were your furry co-tenants loud and destructive, but they were also possibly deadly. You sit up slightly and listen to the chaos below. It's not just random squeaking now, it's organized, synchronized. They're definitely fighting over something. Probably a bit of dried fruit someone dropped 3 weeks ago and forgot to admit. You hear a loud thump. A sack has been tipped. Congratulations, you live in a rodent fraternity house. There's a story, maybe more myth than fact, about a mill in Brittany where a rat population grew so large, they actually disrupted the gear system, clogging up the wooden cogs with fur and bodies. The mill had to be shut down for 3 days to clear them out. Historians still argue whether this was a cautionary tale or just a bizarrely specific village joke, but it says a lot that nobody finds it hard to believe. You try to block it out. You focus on the dull thud of the grindstones, on your itchy straw pillow, on your snoozing bunkmate who is somehow still managing to snore through the apocalypse. But the moment you start to relax, scurry, closer, above your head, you swear you hear one of them drop down onto a higher rafter and scramble toward the ladder. You think, could they climb up to you? Then you remember, of course they can. They're rats. They're professional climbers. Olympic-level trapeze artists with sharp teeth and no shame. You reach into your straw for a weapon, a spoon. You hold it like a dagger. It does not feel reassuring. And the worst part? There's grain everywhere. It's not like you can just shut off the snack supply. Flour is spilling out of split sacks. Cracked wheat crunches underfoot like gravel. The entire windmill is a charcuterie board of tiny delights. They don't even have to try. You're basically paying rent to live inside a rodent buffet. You wonder, briefly, tragically, if your cloak smells like cheese. Some millers did try to fight back. Cats were the most common defense, but they weren't always effective. For one thing, cats sleep more than millers do. For another, rats were fast, organized, and absolutely willing to gang up. More than one mill cat found itself on the losing end of a rodent disagreement. There are historical mentions of placing mint, wormwood, or other strong-smelling herbs in corners of the mill to drive rats out. But herbs are expensive, rats are not. Guess which one usually wins? In the darkness, you hear something knock over a small barrel. That's it. You're done pretending it's not happening. You grab your cloak, curl it tighter around your body, and shift all the way into the farthest corner of your platform. Back to the wall, eyes on the ladder. You imagine it like a battlefield strategy. Protect the high ground, no exposed limbs. Spoon at the ready. You ask yourself the big question. Is this worse than lice? It's honestly too close to call. The moments drag on. A quiet settles, but not the peaceful kind. The suspicious kind. The rats have moved on, for now. Maybe someone in the village tossed out a better-smelling trash pile. Maybe they're plotting something. You don't know, and you don't trust them. Eventually, you lie back down, keeping one eye half open, just in case. You wrap your hood around your face like a medieval sleep mask. It helps, slightly. Above, the sails groan. Below, the gears clatter. And somewhere in the shadows, a rat named Reginald is probably writing his memoir. Sweet dreams, miller's elbow, lung rot, and flower brain. That's what you're dealing with now. Not officially diagnosed, of course, because medieval medicine had about 3 ideas, and most of them involve bleeding. But you can feel it. A soreness in your joints, a tightness in your chest, a fuzziness in your head like you've stuffed your brain with damp wool. Welcome to the glamorous world of Miller ailments. You wake with a groan that wasn't entirely intentional. Your arms ache from hauling sacks earlier. Your back is furious about the straw mattress. Your lungs? They've been marinating overnight in airborne flour and mold spores. Every inhale feels like you're breathing through a pastry bag filled with damp dust. Every cough is its own dramatic performance. Millers were notorious for developing a range of health problems that, while never officially named in their time, were definitely noticed. Chronic coughs, persistent fatigue, skin irritation, and the ever-popular mystery headaches that came from too many hours in a poorly ventilated wooden building filled with fine, inhalable powder. Modern historians believe the condition known as Miller's lung was probably a form of hypersensitivity pneumonitis, essentially your immune system throwing a fit because you keep filling your lungs with microscopic plant dust. Not that anyone in the 1300s was going to diagnose it like that. If you were lucky, someone might wave sage smoke in your face and tell you to stop sleeping on your left side. And then there's Miller's elbow. That's not an official term, but it might as well be. Imagine scooping, hoisting, and cranking heavy sacks of grain, day in, day out, without ergonomic tools or physical therapy. Your joints protest in ways that feel deeply personal. You stretch your arm this morning and feel a twinge so sharp it could slice rye. You whisper something halfway between a prayer and a curse. Your hands are covered in flour, again. You try to wipe them on your tunic, but it just redistributes the dust. Your nails are gray. Your wrists have red patches where flour got under the skin and dried it out. There's a fine crack on your thumb that's started bleeding just slightly, which would be more concerning if your tunic weren't already so stained with work you couldn't tell blood from beet juice. And then there's the mental fog. The mill doesn't stop, neither do you. You're barely sleeping, you're constantly moving, and your brain is functioning on cold porridge and muscle memory. You try to remember what day it is. You try to remember your own name. You blank for a second. That's not good. Flour brain, as you call it, is real. It's a combination of inhaled dust, dehydration, fatigue, and low blood sugar that turns coherent thought into a rare luxury. You're not sure if you're hungry, tired, or hallucinating. Possibly all three. At this point, you'd consider a hallucinated nap a valid form of rest. There's a French folktale about a miller who stayed awake so long, grinding wheat through a storm, that he forgot he was a person and started talking to his own millstone like it was a priest. He confessed all his sins to it, including, allegedly, stealing grain and hiding his neighbor's chicken under the flour sacks. When the storm cleared, he passed out face first into the feed bin and wasn't found until noon the next day, covered in barley and guilt. Historians still argue whether this story was a moral fable, a metaphor for corruption, or just a very relatable account of being absolutely done. You lean against the wall, trying to stretch your back. The building creaks in response, as if sympathizing, or mocking. It's hard to tell with medieval architecture. Your apprentice bunkmate finally stirs, lets out a long wheeze, and sits up, rubbing his face with his hands. His hair is stuck to his head in a combination of flour paste and what you can only describe as ambiguous barn grease. He looks at you with bloodshot eyes and manages a weak nod. You return the favor. No words, just shared suffering. You both know what's next. Morning duties, more hauling, more dust, more chances for tendon damage. The pulley system downstairs has been groaning ominously for 2 days, which means someone, probably you, will have to climb up to check the axle lubrication. You'd rather eat raw millet. Speaking of food, breakfast is technically available. If you count stale bread crusts and a bowl of watery ale with some oats floating in it. You chew slowly, tasting effort more than flavor. You think about quitting, running off to become a shoemaker or a fishmonger or a wandering minstrel. But you know you won't, because this is how things work. You train under the miller, you learn the grind, you inherit the rhythm, and someday, maybe, you get your own mill to cough and ache and break down in. There's no real path to comfort, just seniority. Eventually, you'll get the slightly less awful straw, the dry corner, the cat that listens to you. If you're very lucky, you'll outlive the mill, or at least outlive your elbow pain. The sunlight filters in through the warped wooden slats, casting a dusty glow on everything. You look down at your cloak. It's stiff from flour buildup. If you threw it, it might shatter. You sigh. Time to start the day. But first a stretch, a wheeze, a cough. You rub your temples, wondering if it's the start of a headache or just a continuation of last night's. Either way, it's probably nothing that a little lung rot and a bucket of cold oatmeal can't fix. The dreams get flowery and weird. You're not sure when exactly you slipped into sleep. It might have been after the 6th time you rolled over to avoid that one piece of straw stabbing you in the hip. Or maybe when your bunkmate's snoring settled into a more tolerable rhythm, less foghorn, more distant cow. Either way, you finally doze off, and when you do, the dreams come in fast. At first, it's simple stuff. You're chasing a sack of grain that keeps bouncing away from you. Every time you get close, it sprouts legs and dances just out of reach. Very normal. Then you're at the top of the windmill, but the stairs have turned into licorice. And then, somehow, you're marrying a very large goose who's wearing the miller's hat and speaking in Latin. That's when you realize you've entered the flower brain dream zone. Millers were notorious for strange dreams, and honestly, it makes sense. You spend every waking hour surrounded by dust, mechanical grinding, and the endless tension of falling timber and snapping ropes. Then you try to sleep under those same conditions, with barely enough oxygen and no real peace. Your mind takes that chaos and runs with it. Medieval records mention dreams frequently, often as signs or omens. A miller dreaming of drowning in grain, a warning from God, a dream of wolves chewing through sacks, maybe a demon, maybe just rats again. Historians still argue whether these dreams were interpreted symbolically, or if folks were just subconsciously processing stress in the only REM cycles they had left. You're dreaming now of turning into flour. Not metaphorically, literally. You look down and your arms are powder, drifting in the wind. You try to speak, but the words come out as sifted wheat. You try to walk, but your legs dissolve with each step. You wake with a sharp inhale and the taste of dust on your tongue. Not every dream is surreal. Some are worse. Vivid flashes of accidents you've narrowly avoided during the day. A rope snapping, a wheel spinning too fast. Someone falling into the millstone. You dream these things in detail, replaying them from impossible angles. It's your brain's late-night horror film festival, and you've got front-row seats whether you want them or not. And the mill never helps. Even in sleep you hear it. The groan of the gears, the shuddering beams, the occasional sharp crack of timber adjusting. These sounds filter into your dreams like unwanted narrators, turning even a peaceful field into a place where the grass sways like sails, and the trees hum with grinding noise. There's one dream that keeps coming back. In it, you're climbing the windmill's internal ladder, but it stretches forever. Every time you reach for the next rung, it pulls away like a drawn-out accordion. The top spins like a carousel. You're not afraid exactly, just exhausted. Even in sleep, you can't escape the work. Then, there's the recurring figure, a shadow just behind you. Sometimes it's the ghost monk. Sometimes it's the miller's wife, glaring with disappointment. Once, it was a giant walking bag of flour, with human arms and eyes that weep barley. You woke up from that one sweaty and deeply confused. Sleep researchers, many centuries too late to help you, have proposed that repetitive noise and motion, when mixed with fatigue, can create unusually vivid dreams. Some even classify it as a kind of low-grade hallucination. Your brain gets confused by the non-stop sensory input and starts blending reality with nonsense. You, a medieval mill apprentice with no concept of REM cycles or sleep hygiene, just call it normal, and let's not forget night terrors. Medieval accounts describe people waking in a panic, unable to breathe, convinced they were being crushed by invisible forces. Today, we call it sleep paralysis. Then, it was either demons or bad wind, You've experienced it once or twice. Waking with your body frozen, the mill grinding on, feeling a weight on your chest like a flour sack full of bricks. One old tale from the Netherlands talks about a mill boy who slept too close to the main shaft and dreamed the machinery was alive. It whispered in his ear, told him secrets, asked him to feed it things. He woke up missing a chunk of his own hair and never went back to sleep in the loft again. People said the mill took a piece of him. More likely, he just got too close to the cog and learned a painful lesson about curiosity and exposed gears. Your bunkmate murmurs something unintelligible in his sleep, then coughs loudly and smacks his lips like he just ate a bug. Charming. You glance at the dim light crawling through the narrow window and wonder how much longer you can lie here before someone yells for you to start hauling sacks again. But the dreams cling. Even awake, you feel their residue. The sense that something is just slightly off, that the shadows in the corner aren't quite still, that the mill isn't just a place, it's watching. That feeling doesn't leave you. It settles in the corners of your brain like dust in a crack. You run your hand through your hair and feel straw, sweat, and something unidentifiable. You stop asking questions. Outside, the wind has slowed a little, and the sails creak with a more leisurely moan. You try to savor the moment, this rare stillness between dreams and duty. But in your head, the flower people are still dancing. One of them's probably wearing your spoon as a crown. You blink hard, shake the images loose, and try to remember who you are. Just another tired soul in a wooden box full of gears. Sweet dreams indeed. You're not alone, apprentices and their snores. The truth hits you with a whiff of sour feet and candle smoke as soon as your bunkmate shifts beside you and lets out a snort that could curdle milk. You are, for better or worse, sharing your sleep space. Again, and while the company may be technically human, the overall ambiance leans more toward sweaty goat pen than peaceful rest chamber. Apprenticeship in a medieval windmill wasn't just a job. It was a full-body, all-senses immersion. You didn't just learn how to run the grindstones or manage grain loads. You lived the mill, day and night, with a rotating cast of equally miserable teenagers, all crammed into corners and hay piles and wood plank sleeping platforms like so many underbaked loaves. Tonight's arrangement? 2 apprentices, yourself included, sprawled in a rough corner loft, lying toe-to-toe with barely a space between. No curtains, no privacy, just the familiar nightly ritual of shifting around someone else's twitchy feet, while trying not to inhale too much of their blanket breath. Cozy. The other apprentice, Willem, because of course he's a Willem, is already deep into REM. His head is tilted at an unnatural angle, his mouth open wide enough to store a winter's worth of lentils, and he's making sounds that could easily be mistaken for oxen giving birth. You know he'll deny snoring tomorrow, he always does. Some nights there are more of you up here, 3 or even 4, packed in like sleeping sardines, especially in winter when the windmill's walls are the only real shelter. The more bodies, the warmer it gets, but also, the louder, the smellier, and the more likely someone's elbow ends up in your ear at 2 a.m. Personal space isn't part of the vocabulary, not in training, not in sleep. Back then, communal sleeping was the norm across most of Europe, even among families. It wasn't just for warmth, it was social glue. Apprentices weren't just workers, they were temporary sons, squires of the flour, serving time in this creaky cathedral of grind. You learned by doing, and by sleeping near someone who did it slightly better, or at least slightly earlier. You had to live together to make it work. There were no off-duty hours. If someone woke in the night to wind picking up, or worse, the ominous wobble of an unbalanced millstone, you all woke. You hauled sacks together. You cursed the rain together. You took turns sleeping with one eye open during storm nights. Brotherhood by blisters. Tonight, Willem's leg keeps twitching like he's dreaming of sprinting. You hope it's a race dream and not a nightmare about mill fires again. Last time he had one of those, he kicked over the lantern stand and nearly burned down the oats. Apprentices shared more than just bedding. You shared everything. meals, duties, rumors, and illnesses. Coughs made the rounds like festival flyers. Lice had favorite heads. And gossip? Gossip was oxygen. Candlelight whispering was a nightly ritual. You'd lie in the loft and trade secrets. Who got caught napping near the hopper? Which customer always smelled like spoiled pork? Who might be stealing a little too much flour? Occasionally someone would share a real gem, like which nearby manor girl had walked past the mill twice in the same week. Huge news. Instant theories. Clearly in love with someone. Definitely not just lost. Sometimes the whispering dipped into darker territory. Tales of accidents, of apprentices who lost fingers or fell into the machinery. The time the miller's cousin got caught in a belt loop and was flung across the grinding room like a sack of bad rye. It was always someone's uncle or neighbor's nephew. Half truth, half warning. And then there were the more personal confessions. Quiet, vulnerable things, fears, hopes. How long you planned to stay. Whether you'd ever get your own mill. Whether you even wanted one. You, lying in the dark, listening, sometimes saying nothing. Just there. Just surviving together. Historians still argue whether these apprentice arrangements fostered camaraderie or quiet resentment. Probably both. You could bond deeply with someone one night, then nearly murder them the next morning over who got the dry tunic. That's just the rhythm of proximity. You reach into your cloak and pull out a crust of bread you saved from earlier, dry and probably older than you. You snap it in half and toss the larger piece toward Willem. It hits his face. He jerks awake, gasps, and flails an arm. "What?" he wheezes. "Midnight snack," you whisper. He grunts and mumbles something unintelligible. You assume it's thanks, or a curse. Either way, it's the closest thing to conversation you've had in hours. Another day, another dusty breath of flour and candle smoke. You lie back and stare at the ceiling, now familiar with every knot and splinter above your head. You've counted them before. Probably will again. Your eyes start to flutter closed, but then Willem lets out another massive snore. You reach for your spoon, not to attack him, just to tuck it under your straw pillow, familiar, grounding. Apprentice life is loud, uncomfortable, and deeply communal, but it's also the only thing standing between you and total collapse. If the sails start spinning too fast tonight, if the gears shift wrong, if a storm kicks up hard and angry, you won't face it alone. You'll wake together, curse together, and crawl down to fix it together. And maybe, if you're lucky, fall back asleep again, side by side, under the spinning sky. When the wind picks up, so does the terror. It starts subtly, a deeper moan in the rafters, the kind that makes the hair on your arms rise before your brain even registers a threat. Then, one of the shutters flaps open. The draft rushes through like it's late for something, and somewhere above you, in the tower's skullcap of groaning beams and jittering gears, the windmill wakes up in full. You sit up and feel the shift in the floor before you hear it. The sails outside are spinning faster now, slicing through the wind like oars in a churning sea, and every gust means more speed, more force transferred into the main shaft, more mechanical chaos echoing through the wooden bones of the building you currently live and maybe die in. The mill doesn't ease into motion. It lurches. The gears slam into place with a shudder that rattles the window panes and knocks a small pile of oats off a nearby shelf. Willem mumbles something profane in his sleep and rolls over, as if this isn't a rapidly escalating nightmare situation. You, on the other hand, are fully alert. See, in theory, faster wind equals faster milling, productivity, efficiency. In practice, it's a bit like giving espresso to a warhorse and then trying to ride it blindfolded. The whole building now feels like it's teetering on the edge of structural rebellion. The main gear shaft groans under the added pressure. Every rotation comes with a slap of resistance, like two giants arm wrestling through a wall. The walls themselves, built more for breathability than structural integrity, creak like old ships at sea. You throw on your cloak and scramble down the ladder to the grinding floor, nearly slipping as the boards jump beneath your feet. Everything's in motion. Chains are swinging. The belt drive is vibrating like a plucked lute string. The hopper's shaking like it's nervous. This is what millers feared most. Wind that wouldn't quit. Strong gusts could overload the entire system. If the sails spun too quickly, the rotational force could splinter the wooden teeth of the main cogwheel or worse, cause the millstones to spin erratically, breaking loose from their housing and turning into what can only be described as historical landmines. And stopping the mill isn't as simple as yanking a brake lever. Slowing or stopping the sails mid-spin requires adjusting the sails manually, sometimes climbing outside to reef them or turning the entire cap into the wind's quiet zone, which is exactly as dangerous as it sounds. Mill accidents during windstorms were so common they developed their own kind of dark folklore. In Flanders, they told of the Screaming Mill, a structure that, in one wild storm, spun so fast the friction caught fire. By morning, it was ash. Some claimed you could still hear the sound of grinding when you walked across the field, long after the structure was gone. You peer up at the main gear. It's still holding, but the teeth are gnashing hard, wooden pegs flexing with each revolution. You wince at the memory of the last miller's assistant who lost an arm trying to wedge a block into a moving cog during high wind. They said he died quickly. You doubt that. Historians still argue whether windmill technology at the time was advanced or just stubbornly suicidal. On one hand, they were marvels, adaptable, efficient, clever. On the other hand, they were wood and rope nightmares that barely respected physics, beautifully terrifying. You reach for the control chain. Well, not a control exactly, more like a suggestion rope. If you tug it just right, it can adjust the sack weight that helps regulate the feed. If you pull it wrong, the hopper might collapse, or the sack might burst open and bury you in oats. You take a breath, you pull, it holds, for now. The grinding stones slow slightly, enough to ease the pressure. The gears settle into a slightly less apocalyptic rhythm. You climb back up, heart hammering, and slump against the wall. Your body's vibrating. The mill's still growling under your feet. The wind keeps whipping past the wooden walls, making everything hum like it's haunted. You look out the tiny window slit and see the sails. A blur of motion, a hypnotic spiral. You wonder, do people down in the village ever stop and listen to the sound of this place when it's storming? Do they know what it feels like to lie under it? To feel every gust translated into vibration, every gust a question. Will the mill hold? Will the stones stay in place? Will we survive the night without a gear exploding through the ceiling? You lie back down on your bed of straw, but your eyes won't close. Every rattle sounds suspicious. Every groan could be the start of a split beam or a cracked axle. Willem, still horizontal, finally opens one eye and mutters, "Too much wind." You stare at him. "Thanks, Willem, truly." He shrugs and immediately goes back to sleep. You envy his apathy. In moments like this, sleep isn't really possible. Your body stays braced. Your muscles refuse to unclench. Even your dreams would be bouncing off the walls. So instead, you count the creaks between gusts. You try to guess the speed of the sails by the pitch of the wind. Eventually the storm settles, not all at once, just little by little, like a tantrum wearing itself out. The sails slow. The gears resume their thudding pace. Predictable again, almost gentle. You exhale, not safe but safer. You roll onto your side, hugging the edge of the straw pile, and close your eyes. The mill groans, the wind sighs, and in the quiet between gusts, you almost believe you might survive until morning. Fire hazard with extra splinters. It's not the wind or the rats that finally yank you fully awake tonight. It's the smell. Acrid, sharp, and terrifyingly familiar. Something burning. Not a raging fire, not yet, but a telltale hint of scorched oil or dry wood, kissed a little too lovingly by open flame. You sit up so fast you hit your head on a beam. Typical. The pain's immediate, but the panic overshadows it. You sniff again. Definitely something smoldering. You kick Willem awake, with zero ceremony. He grunts, half-conscious, then immediately bolts upright when the scent reaches him too. Because here's the fun, terrible truth about medieval windmills. They are made almost entirely of the world's most flammable materials: wooden walls, wooden floors, rope pulleys, straw bedding, oil-soaked tools, dust, so much dust, and flour. And if you didn't already know this, flour dust is wildly, dangerously combustible. A single spark in a high dust environment can cause a flash fire, or in worst cases, an explosion. No joke, a mill can go up like a bonfire dipped in candle wax. Your eyes scan the space. The lantern, burning low in the corner, is the first suspect. It's an open flame housed in a rusted metal casing that has never met a proper inspection. You stumble over to it and carefully snuff it out, but the burning smell remains, not stronger yet, but not gone either. You check the grinding floor. The millstones are still turning, sluggish now, but grinding grain generates heat, especially if the stones are too close together. That friction, it builds, and if a stone cracks or grinds against itself with no grain between, boom, sparks. It's a known issue. Even in the 14th century, some millers kept buckets of sand near the stones for emergency smothering. Not that it helped much. One French mill burned to the ground in under 15 minutes after a spark jumped from stone to flour sack. Everyone got out, but the only thing left standing was the anvil they used to sharpen tools. You shuffle to the corner of the floor where the hopper sits. No visible fire, but the underside feels warm, too warm. You and Willem look at each other, silent, then simultaneously grab whatever sacks are nearby and start yanking grain away from the hot spot. The logic, if it does catch, there's less to burn. You cough, flour and smoke both hitting your throat now. A draft pulls through the crack in the window slats and stirs the air. The smell weakens. The breeze saved you this time. You collapse onto a stool, sweating and exhausted. Willem flops beside you, breathing hard. "Just a warm pulley," he mutters. "Could have been the whole mill." He grunts in agreement. There's no fire, not this time, but it's close enough to remind you of every story you've ever heard. There's the tale of the candle mill near York, a windmill lit by lanterns all night during harvest season. One night the wind shifted, the lantern fell, and the whole place lit up like a holy warning. It burned so fast the townspeople didn't even have time to ring the bells. Afterward, they found the apprentice's bones curled under a beam, still holding the chain he'd tried to pull to stop the sails. True? Hard to say. But you've heard enough versions of that story to know this isn't just legend, it's a warning. Flour dust, by the way, was still causing fires well into the industrial age. Even in modern times, grain silos explode when ventilation is poor and dust concentration gets high. But at least now we have fire codes, sprinkler systems, emergency exits. You have a wooden bucket and a prayer. You walk the perimeter one last time. No embers, no glow. The beams above your head are soot-stained but intact. You touch the gear shaft. It's warm, but not burning. The sails outside are barely turning now. The wind has slowed, as if also tired from the near disaster. Back in your sleeping corner, you nudge your bedding away from the lantern's old spot and wrap yourself in your cloak. You and Willem lie there in silence, the kind that only happens after your life almost became a folk tale. You can't shake the thought, this building wants to burn. Not out of malice, just design. It's a stack of potential energy, always creaking, always waiting. Every lantern lit, every flint struck, every cloth dragged across a dry beam. Historians still argue whether medieval millers were reckless or just practical, balancing risk with the urgent need to feed a village. Fire prevention existed, but it was minimal. Wet rags, sand, hope. That's it. You'd think people would learn after the first 20 or 30 mills went up in smoke. But the grain still needed grinding. And wind didn't wait. You hear Willem's breathing slow beside you. His panic past, returned to his default unconscious snore mode. You envy him again. Your heartbeat is still elevated. You stare at the ceiling. The beams are closer than they were this morning. Or maybe that's just the shadows playing tricks. Eventually, you close your eyes. Not because you feel safe, but because you're too tired to stay awake for another almost catastrophe. You leave the rest to fate. And sand. And maybe, if you're lucky, the monk ghost will handle Firewatch tonight. Medieval OSHA was not a thing, which becomes crystal clear around 4:04 a.m. when you stub your toe on a loose gear sprocket lying in the middle of the walkway, trip over a coil of rope that hasn't been stored properly since last harvest, and narrowly avoid cracking your skull on a nail sticking straight out of a beam labeled, unironically, the safe side. You sit down, rubbing your foot, and realize this place is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Except lawsuits haven't been invented yet. Neither has workplace safety, or basic structural logic for that matter. You're not even mad, it's just expected. The medieval windmill is a machine disguised as a building, or possibly a building pretending to be a machine. Either way, it's a swirling chaos of wooden cogs, spinning shafts, grinding stone, dust, rope, sacks, swinging pulleys, and zero caution signs. Need to lubricate a gear? Climb up on a rickety platform 3 stories high and wedge your arm into the turning mechanism with nothing but animal fat and hope. Need to adjust the sails? Clamber outside onto a ledge during a windstorm and pray your boots hold. And if they don't, well, there's a very nice patch of dirt behind the mill, where people remember you almost fondly. There were no guardrails, no helmets, no mill safety certification, with laminated cards and reflective vests. Apprentices learned by doing, and often by bleeding. You look at your hands, covered in flour, calloused, and sporting at least 3 cuts you don't remember getting. There's one scab that's shaped like a tiny gear tooth. You name it Gerald. Gerald now lives here, rent-free. To be fair, mill design was innovative, ingenious even. Using wind to turn gears to grind flour was a remarkable feat of pre-industrial engineering. But it was also deeply unforgiving. If anything jammed, snapped, or overloaded, something broke, usually you. You once heard about a miller near Bruges who tried to fix a belt drive while the sails were turning. He slipped. The rotating shaft grabbed his tunic, spun him around 3 times, and flung him into a wall so hard his boots left marks. The local priest called it an act of divine correction. Everyone else just called it Tuesday. Historians still argue whether windmills were safe for their time, or whether the danger was simply considered a normal occupational hazard. Either way, nobody was showing up with checklists or building inspections. If the mill stood upright and didn't immediately kill anyone, it passed. And don't get started on the ladders. You climb at least 3 different sets of them each day. All of them handmade. None of them level. Half of them missing rungs. The one to the cap floor wobbles every time you touch it, like it's trying to decide whether now is the time to betray you. The answer is always, soon. Then there's the dust. Flour dust isn't just a fire risk, it's a lung hazard. After months of breathing it in, your cough develops a personality. Some millers carried kerchiefs or made rudimentary masks, using scraps of wool soaked in vinegar. You tried that once, it worked. But it also made you smell like a foot salad, so the other apprentices revolted. One particularly bad day, you noticed your vision going fuzzy. Not emotional, you weren't crying. Well, not much. Just actual blurriness. Turned out your eyes were full of grain husks. You spent an hour blinking like an owl with seasonal allergies. There's no break room, no off switch. The only thing that passes for rest is collapsing in the straw corner and hoping you don't roll into a bucket. Even the tools are hazards. Metal wedges, wooden mallets, hand-forged blades, all left out in the open, usually blade up, because no one's got time to be careful when there's 100 weight of barley waiting to be ground before lunch. Once you tried to organize the tool shelf. You got halfway through when the head miller walked by, laughed, and tossed a greasy chain on top of your neat little rows. "Don't tidy it too much," he said. "Mice don't like order. You don't even know what that means. There were some attempts at safety, sort of. Experienced millers might carve warning marks near dangerous spots. A cross on the beam above the fast-moving shaft. A red stain, possibly blood, possibly beetroot, near the spinning stone axle. But mostly, safety was taught by repetition, observation, and caution born of fear. You learned quickly. Don't wear anything loose. Don't lean over a hopper. Don't walk under a sack pulley unless you want a sack-to-skull experience. Don't ignore creaking wood, because it's never just settling. You check your boots. One sole's coming loose. You're not surprised. These things weren't built for OSHA compliance. They were built to survive cold mornings and occasional kicks to vermin. Willem wakes up, groaning, and smacks his head immediately on a beam. Every time, he mutters, rubbing the same spot as yesterday. You nod solemnly. There's a dent in the wood from where his skull keeps greeting it. You're considering carving his name into it. As you move to start your shift, you step carefully over a slick patch of spilled oil that's been there since last autumn. You nod at the loose floorboard that creaks with malevolent delight, and you pause before descending the ladder, testing it with one foot like a sailor boarding a suspicious dinghy. Medieval life wasn't meant to be easy, but mills took it a step further. They were marvels of ingenuity, yes, but they were also chaotic traps of whirling death, powered by weather and denial. Still, you step into the gear room like you do every day, carefully, quietly, spoon in one hand, determination in the other. If something goes wrong, you'll just add another scar, maybe name it Gerald's brother. When the town turns on the miller, it's a quiet sort of tension at first. A few strange looks at market. A muttered complaint from the baker about the latest batch being light on flour but heavy on excuses. Then the priest delivers a sermon about the dangers of greed, and for some reason everyone turns to look at the miller's pew. The air in the village doesn't shift all at once, but oh, it shifts. You hear the whispers long before the accusations, and you, the mill apprentice, are caught smack in the middle, sleeping in a tower that's also a target. See, millers have always had a complicated relationship with their communities. They're essential. Without them, no one eats bread. But they're also resented. Not rich exactly, but not poor either. Millers set their own hours, they handle valuable goods, and they charge for their services. Something that tends to irritate people who are used to paying only God and the weather. In theory, a miller takes a small percentage of every sack of grain as payment. In practice, well, who's checking? That missing handful might be fair compensation, or it might be the 10th missing handful in a row. And when the bread doesn't rise, or the flour is suspiciously gray, people start doing math they don't like. This morning, the tension gets personal. A farmer comes stomping up the hill, red-faced and angry, claiming his best rye was swapped for barley husks. The miller shrugs, says the sacks must have been mismarked. The farmer doesn't buy it. Neither does the blacksmith, who's suddenly remembering that time his flour smelled like soot. And just like that, a crowd starts forming, slowly but with purpose. You and Willem are still sweeping out the grinding room when you hear them. Dozens of boots crunching on the frosty path outside. The mood in the mill shifts instantly. The miller lowers his voice. "Get the door bar," he says. You hesitate. "Is it that serious?" "It's always that serious," he mutters. Historically, this wasn't rare. Villages have long accused millers of cheating, sometimes with evidence, often without. They were seen as the middlemen of the food chain. If the harvest was poor, the miller got blamed. If the flour didn't bake right, the miller must have done something to it. And if bread prices rose, well, clearly the miller was hoarding. Historians still argue whether these accusations were justified or just scapegoating. There's truth on both sides. Some millers were honest, overworked, and trying to survive a system that stacked against them. Others were, frankly, thieves in aprons. Either way, when tensions flared, it got ugly. Some millers were fined, some were stripped of their licenses, some were gently drowned in the local stream. Justice varied widely by location and how many torches the crowd brought. You peer out the slat in the wall. The crowd outside is restless, voices raised, hands waving. The farmer is still yelling about theft. Someone else is holding up a torn sack like a flag. You spot the village reeve in the back, not stopping them, not encouraging either, just watching. You turn to the miller. What now? He sighs. Now, we wait. Maybe they'll calm down. You wait. They don't calm down. Someone throws a rock at the wall. It doesn't do much, just thuds against the timber. But it sets a tone. You and Willem back into the shadows. You don't want to be caught in the middle, literally or metaphorically. Your allegiance is fuzzy. You work for the miller, but you also live in that village. You buy from those shops. You walk past those faces every week. Inside, the mill seems smaller. The gears loom. The walls feel thinner. The miller finally steps outside, arms raised. He starts talking. You can't hear everything, just fragments. Misunderstanding, sorting error, no intention. The farmer shouts back, then someone else, then half the crowd. You watch from behind a sack. You feel it in your gut, this could go either way. Then something shifts. The priest steps forward, a word here. A hand on a shoulder, a calming gesture. The energy dies down, not completely but enough. Some people back away. The farmer stomps off, still fuming, but the rest hesitate, then scatter slowly. The miller comes back inside, visibly pale. He doesn't speak for a long moment. Just sits on a sack and stares at the floor. You don't ask what he's thinking, you already know. Even now, the miller walks a narrow beam. He's too vital to be ignored, too vulnerable to be trusted, and too isolated to be easily defended. He pulls out a small flask, takes a swig, then hands it to you. You hesitate, take a sip. It burns. Barley alcohol maybe, or kerosene. Hard to tell. Lesson number 1, he says quietly. Never cheat on market day. Lesson 2, you ask? He leans back, eyes closed. Don't make enemies who live downhill from your only exit. You laugh, but it's not funny. Outside, the wind picks up. The sails begin to turn again. Inside, trust spins a little slower. Your only escape is prayer or beer. At this point, you've had enough. The noise, the rats, the aches, the accusations, the near fire, the surprise sociology lesson about economic scapegoats. Your entire body is operating on flour dust and fumes. You don't even remember what it's like to not be tired. And the windmill? It's still grinding, still groaning, still muttering threats in mechanical whispers. So you sit on a sack of wheat and wonder, how did people survive this without losing their minds? The answer, it turns out, is fairly straightforward. They prayed, or they drank, or both. Willem has already cracked open a small clay jug. The smell hits you instantly. Bitter, sour, and familiar. Ale. Not the fancy kind, not even the I brewed this with intention kind. This is the watery, slightly vinegary version passed down through generations of exhausted workers who didn't care about taste, so long as it got the job done. Breakfast, he mutters, taking a swig and passing it to you. You hesitate only briefly before drinking. It's not good, but it's not supposed to be. It's a buffer, a fermented sigh between you and reality. And in this line of work, beer wasn't just a vice. It was practically healthcare. Water wasn't always safe. Wells could be contaminated, and rivers weren't exactly pristine. Low-alcohol beer, what people now call small beer, was safer to drink. It was consumed by workers, children, monks, millers, and everyone in between. It didn't knock you off your feet. Well, not fast, but it took the edge off. And when your daily edge includes spinning blades and community outrage, that's important. But alcohol wasn't the only coping mechanism. Religion permeated every inch of medieval life, and for good reason. When the world felt arbitrary, dangerous, and full of inexplicable suffering, faith provided structure. It was the calendar, the news, the therapy, and the moral compass all rolled into one. The mill itself might even have a small carved cross above the main doorframe. Many did. Others bore chalk markings or iron nails hammered into beams at odd angles, not just for luck, but for protection. You remember a faded inscription upstairs, Sanctus Florianus, Custodiat Hunc Locum. May Saint Florian guard this place. Fitting, since he was the patron saint of chimney sweeps and protection from fire. You find yourself whispering a short prayer under your breath. Not something formal, just a hope, a plea. Let the gear teeth hold. Let the sacks stay dry. Let no one fall into the machinery today. Amen. There are saints for millers, by the way. Saint Honoratus of Amiens was one, known for being the patron saint of bakers and millers alike. Probably because without millers, no one baked anything but complaints. Some towns even built chapels near their mills, especially after accidents. You've seen one. Half-crumbled stone nestled next to a broken watermill downriver, covered in moss and regret. Historians still argue whether faith in these contexts was genuinely spiritual or mostly psychological, coping rituals disguised as divine reverence. But you don't care about the theory. You care about the few moments of peace it gives you to stare at the wall and pretend the mill isn't quietly conspiring to eat your spine. You take another sip from the jug. The ale's warming now, settling into your gut like a fireless hearth. You sigh. It helps. Willem pulls out a tiny wooden charm from his belt pouch. It's carved roughly, probably from scrap wood, something between a cross and a weird bird. Keeps the gears from biting, he says. You nod, even though you know it doesn't. But it's not about working, it's about believing. You've seen other apprentices with charms. One wore a dried clove on a string, another swore by a feather tucked behind his ear, claimed it belonged to a holy goose. You never ask questions. Everyone in the mill finds their own talisman eventually. Maybe yours is your spoon, maybe it's Willem, maybe it's just your stubborn refusal to leave. And then there are the monks. Monasteries often controlled local mills, either directly or through leased agreements. Monks knew the power of flour. Grain was life, and controlling grain meant controlling tithes, trade, and trust. Some monks prayed for the mill daily, others taxed it. A few even worked in them, though that was less common. Manual labor was for the lay brothers and apprentices, but their presence loomed. You remember one visiting, robed in brown, soft-spoken, offering blessings that smelled like old candles and dried herbs. He placed a thumb on your forehead and whispered Latin that felt like a blanket. You never forgot that. You're not particularly devout, not in the formal way, but you believe in something because you have to. No one survives the night shift in a creaking wind-powered food processor without a little superstition and a lot of hope. Outside, the wind has shifted again. You feel it before you hear it. The sails creak and moan. A new rhythm begins. You glance at the rope that helps regulate the feed. Frayed. Probably needs fixing. Not tonight. You take one last sip. The jug's nearly empty. Willem's already passed out again, this time with his foot in a sack of barley and his mouth open like he's mid-sermon. You consider praying again, but instead you just close your eyes and murmur, "Please, just let us get to sunrise." The mill answers with a soft thunk, like a nod. Sunrise, and you're still covered in flour. The first hints of light don't so much pour into the windmill as sneak in reluctantly, squeezing through the warped wood and cloudy window slits like they're just as tired as you. It's not a golden, glowing sunrise, more of a damp, gray smear across the sky. The kind of dawn that smells like wet grain and aches like a bruise. Your eyes open to the familiar crust of flour stuck to your lashes. You blink and flakes of it fall into your mouth. Tastes like bitter chalk and last night's anxiety. Willem is still asleep, snoring in that half-deflated bagpipe way he's perfected. One arm's dangling off the straw bed, twitching occasionally, possibly dreaming of being crushed by a flour sack. You sit up slowly, every muscle in your back creaking like the floorboards. You've slept, technically, but it doesn't feel like it. The wind has calmed. The sails outside are barely moving. Just a slow, lazy turn, more out of habit than purpose. It's the quietest it's been in hours. and you find yourself missing the rhythm. A strange thing, when your brain has adapted to find comfort in chaos. The mill itself is still, momentarily. The gears are still resting. The ropes aren't swinging. There's just the occasional pop of timber expanding in the morning cold, the tiny rustle of mice, or rats, or whatever uninvited guest is nesting in the oat barrel, and the low murmur of wind humming through the cracked frame. You're caked in flour, it's everywhere. Under your tunic, inside your boots, between your fingers, in your ears. You run a hand through your hair and come away with a pale paste that might qualify as dough. You're basically a half-baked pastry with a pulse. There's a moment, brief and blurry, where everything seems oddly peaceful. The kind of peace that comes not from comfort, but from survival. You're still here. The mill didn't collapse. It didn't catch fire. The gears didn't explode. You made it through another night in a building that, by every reasonable standard, should have killed you by now. And still, somehow, you love it. You drag yourself down the ladder and begin the morning routine without even thinking. Check the hopper, sweep the floor, wipe the condensation off the inside of the window where someone drew an unflattering face in the fog. Probably Willem. Probably of you. You drink water from the dented tin cup near the flour press. It tastes like rust and grain, but it's cold and real. And you're still breathing, so that's something. Outside, the village is waking too. A few distant barks. A cart rattling over frozen mud. Church bells ringing low and slow, calling the faithful, or maybe just keeping time for the tired. You can't tell anymore. Willem joins you eventually, bleary-eyed and full of complaints. You hand him the brush. He doesn't say thank you, but he does grunt in a way that might mean, I acknowledge your suffering. The two of you work in silence for a while, brushing flour dust into corners, inspecting gear teeth for splinters. Everything hurts, but the rhythm is familiar now. You know where to step. You know which board creaks the loudest. You know which pulley is one fray away from snapping. You know how to live here. Historians still argue whether the daily life of medieval millers was miserable or just misunderstood. Some saw them as privileged, hoarders of grain, middlemen of wealth. Others as cursed, trapped in a constant cycle of danger and isolation. You think they were both. The truth, as usual, is somewhere between the stories and the splinters. You look around the mill, at the beams you've nearly been brained by, the ropes you've tripped over, the dust that's likely giving you some future-dated lung ailment, and you feel something odd. Pride. You've survived the night. Again. You've learned to live inside a creature that breathes wind and eats wheat, and only occasionally tries to crush you. You've heard its voice in the grind. You've heard its warnings in the wind. You've learned the weight of each sound, the meaning behind every creak. You don't control the mill, but you understand it, and that might be enough. So now the gears slow. The sails, once roaring like giants' arms in the sky, turn with the gentleness of a lullaby. The wind no longer howls, it sighs. The ropes hang still, the pulleys sleep. You lie back once more, in the corner where the straw is just a little softer now, where the morning light catches in the motes of flour drifting through the beams. They fall like snow, weightless, slow. Everything softens with the sunrise. The smell of scorched oil fades. The aching wood sighs beneath you, but does not break. Even Willem's snoring becomes something close to a melody. The windmill breathes, and so do you. Out there in the village, bread will be baked, ale will be poured. Stories will be told of the strange thumping tower that grinds all night long, its shadows lit by lanterns, its heart powered by wind. Some will swear it's haunted. Others will simply nod and say, that's just the mill. But here inside, you know better. You know every knot in the wood, every groan of the gear, every superstition scrawled in chalk on the beams. You know the truth behind the noise and the silence. You know what it's like to sleep in a place that never truly rests. And now your eyes close. Let the sails spin. Let the dust settle. Let the quiet wrap around you like a blanket pulled fresh from the fire. The windmill watches over you. Sweet dreams.